I'm Stephanie, and I'm a certified personal trainer.
Hi, I'm Kate, and I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist.
And this is a podcast dedicated to educating women on their journey to optimal health. There's so much that we can do to optimize our health, but we've talked to so many women who just simply don't know how.
These conversations are what inspired us to start Omnia Fit. The Omnia Fit podcast is all about interviewing certified professionals to educate women on improving our health. We'll talk about things like stress relief through exercise, what we need to know about our hormones, the truth behind fad diets, and more. So subscribe, follow along, and let us know if there are any topics you want to hear more about.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. You have Stephanie here, and in this episode, I am interviewing Dr. Amanda Neri. She's a doctor of physical therapy and is very experienced in working with runners at all different points of their journey. So we thought that talking about running would be a great topic for today. Keep in mind we are talking to a physical therapist, so we are going to focus a little more about things to watch out for, injury prevention, common injuries that do happen, etc. This does not mean that you'll inevitably get an injury if you start running, but we do hope that this podcast offers some caution and helps you take care of your body while you practice this wonderful sport. So, without further ado, here is Dr. Amanda Neri. Hello, Dr. Neri.
Hello.
So, we're talking about all the runners today because you know a lot about running, are a runner, work with a lot of runners. And I feel like it's because, especially being in Chicago, having the lakeshore and so many beautiful running paths, it seems like a lot of people, when they want to start working out, will just start running because it's super accessible, pretty inexpensive to do. You just need a pair of shoes and some clothes. Pretty easy thing to do to just start, even if you haven't been working out and aren't in shape at all. What's your reaction to hearing someone say, I'm not a runner, but I'm just going to start running?
Good question. I liked that intro about being in Chicago, actually. I hadn't really thought about that myself today, but you're so right. When you're living somewhere that has more outdoor options, like mountains, somewhere you can go hike, even trail running is a bit different than road running. You're not going to see as many people that are strictly running. So that's a really good point, actually. I just thought I would comment on that. That's cool. Hearing about people starting out with running it always makes me happy. First of all, I think, if anyone's doing something that they enjoy, that's great. And thinking about it from an anatomy perspective, the human body is very much built for running. We have these long springy tendons, like the Achilles tendon, that is basically built for that continuous load bearing and springy motion that you get when you're running. So from a design perspective, if you want to call it that, we are natural born runners. However, without proper training and jumping into running for the first time without any experience with it, especially if you're a more sedentary person, someone who sits a lot, there are risks that come with that in terms of injuries. So I think getting into running is great. A lot of people think it is the best way to jump into weight loss, and that's not always the case for everyone. There's definitely cases where different forms of exercise would work better for someone's body and where they're at currently. But I don't think there's no reaction to that makes me say, oh, they shouldn't be doing that. It's just
right.
With the proper knowledge and training, I think it's great if people like to run.
Yeah. Actually, in the What is a Personal Trainer podcast, that was an answer of mine where it's, as long as you're moving your body and you're having fun. I mean, that's got to be number one. If you're not having fun in what you're doing, you're probably not going to stick with your habit of being physically moving, being physically fit. I told you
your fitness journey.
Yeah, I told you it was going to be one of us messing up the words. 1,000% going to be me. This is like, everyone get ready. This is just the theme of whenever I'm on a podcast. But as long as you're having fun and you're doing some sort of movement, it's a good thing. As long as you're doing it safely and not hurting yourself. And I think that's the key point you just mentioned is when you're just, going from being very sedentary, especially after this last year and a half with the pandemic, if you've been sitting, working from home a lot, and then you all of a sudden just start running, there is a chance of injuries happening. Things to watch out for. So what would be your advice to someone who is listening to this and does want to be a runner, does want to start off? What's your advice to them?
Ooh, there is a lot of advice to start.
Breaking it down.
To start, I would say to begin a little bit slower than you think you should. And I know that contradicts a lot of people's mindset. They're like, I'm gonna get fit, I'm gonna run a half marathon, I'm gonna lose weight, whatever their goal is, whatever they want to work towards. A lot of people like to jump right into it, myself included. I can't say I take my own advice all the time.
Easier said than done.
Easier said than done, definitely. But I did learn to take my own advice the hard way when I overworked myself a little bit. And, that results in injuries. And then you have
I remember that.
Yeah.
You got hurt this summer. Yeah, you were a little out of commission for like a week.
Yeah, that was more of a contact injury. But when I first started running, I definitely had like an overuse.
Different injury.
Yeah, that was from soccer. But I was running when it happened. So.
Yeah, okay, well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'd say just start a little bit slower, whether that is how fast you're running, how often you're running, or in what increment you're running. If you're doing interval training, just feeling it out in a way where you can listen to your body. And if it's telling you to stop and rest, you can do that before it's too late and you need to rest for longer than you wanted to from that activity. A lot of people also get really discouraged when they start running because they are outside running around people who have been running for a long time. I have heard this with, I don't know the exact statistics on this mindset, but with a lot of my clients, their fear comes from, I'm so slow now because I haven't run in a while and I am embarrassed about my pace and I'm not where I was a few years ago, so I feel really discouraged about that. And these are comments we hear all the time in healthcare and in training, that people are just discouraged by where they're at right now. So just being where you're at is enough when you're starting out. The fact that you are out there doing it, whether it's on the treadmill, outside, that's great. And I think a walk-run combo, also great. To take it back a step further, just working on your 10,000 steps a day is somewhere to start if you want to get into running. Walking plays a huge role in our endurance when we do start running. If we're just going from sitting on the couch all day to then trying to go run a 5K, it's going to be a lot harder than if we're active and walking throughout our day as well. So those are just a few pieces of advice for new runners. And then, of course, you and I both know cross-training is a huge part of it, and that might be a lot to handle for someone who just wants to jump into it right away, but the more you can strengthen the muscles that help with endurance, that help with speed, that help with injury prevention, the better off you're going to be when you do begin running.
Yeah, I love that, because it's almost like, how do you say the phrase, gym intimidation?
Yeah.
I think is the coined term when you go to the gym and you're just nervous to do anything. I never thought about that happening outside of the gym too, but especially when you're on Lakeshore Path or seeing a bunch of runners who are going 10 miles an hour, acting like they're not even breaking a sweat.
Yep.
Yeah, that's also terrifying. And especially a lot of runners, if you're just a person who has some sort of competitive mindset, whether that's you used to be an athlete in high school or college, or just a competitive person in general, that definitely makes a lot of sense that you start running and you're not where you want to be, so you get frustrated, and then that's when you push too hard, that's when you get injured, or that's when you're pushing too hard so your body isn't properly progressing, so you're not seeing the results you want, and which also seems a little counterintuitive. I don't know if you want to speak to that, pushing too hard and not seeing the results you want, but there's a whole slew of things that can happen when you just start off going as hard as you want because you're super motivated and just sprinting through everything.
Yeah.
Even on Pinterest, they have the Couch to 5K, and they usually have those programs for like 8 to 12 weeks. Like it takes time.
Yeah, it definitely does, and I think it takes more time than a lot of people realize, especially, you can log onto Instagram and see someone logging their run, and you see a photo of it and you see their time and how far they went, and you have no idea what that actually looked like, right? You don't know if they were starting and stopping. You're just immediately seeing that other people are doing it, and so why can't I jump in and do it? And
also, they probably only posted their best time that they ever got.
100%.
So.
I actually made it a point on my page to post my slower runs. I'm like, I wasn't feeling it today. This is a realistic pace for when I wasn't feeling it.
Yeah,
just
that's
so people
awesome.
know there's a huge variance in what your pace can be, or how you're feeling. But yeah, overtraining is a very real thing. A lot of athletes experience it. Your body essentially starts to shut down, get really fatigued, and then you are prone to injury and not seeing those results that you're looking for. So in any periodization, there is a time for rest, and that is a huge part of any fitness program. I know people wearing the Whoop bands like yourself.
Yes.
They're so amazing at telling you when your body certain physiological factors are showing you that your body needs rest. And that's why bands like that are really nice for people that kind of need that cue looking at it. Or just, listening to your body. If you feel really tired and you're like, hey, I don't think I should run, I might hurt myself today, that's something to notice and listen to as well.
Yeah.
Also, a little reminder there, one thing I've learned a lot over the last 6 months or so is if you're feeling slow and groggy, might have nothing to do with your training the day before or how well you recovered. Could be your time of the month, it could be stress, it could be your sleep from the night before. Like, there are so many factors that go into how well you're recovered and how you feel before you run, not just how in shape you are.
Totally.
So also just a friendly reminder.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's always good to remind people of that. And there's instances where being active and getting some exercise in is going to help with that feeling, and other instances where it might exacerbate it, depending on what's causing it. So when someone's getting into a new fitness program, really listening to those cues and trying to figure out what their body needs in those moments is important. And it sounds like it's a lot harder than it is to do the way we're talking about it right now. It sounds very technical, but it's really just a matter of knowing yourself and knowing when you can push yourself and when not to.
Yeah, and being okay with, if you start off with walking 2 minutes and running 2 minutes, let's say you progressed all the way to running for 5 minutes, walking for 2 minutes, let's say, but then you're feeling really slow and sluggish, you didn't sleep well, you're on your period, so you go back to getting 30 minutes of movement in, walking for, 3 minutes, running for 2 minutes, whatever it is, just, regressing it a little bit. Like you said, you're still getting that movement in, it'll still probably make you feel good, but it's just getting over that mental hump of it's okay to slow it down and not do what I know I'm usually capable of because I'm listening to my body. Being a little bit intuitive with training.
Definitely.
Easier said than done, though.
Yeah, we would both agree with that.
Yeah. What's some advice that you give to someone who struggles with that, who struggles with slowing down and just being okay taking a step back on days they're not feeling it?
The advice I would give them is to really try to start noticing just even the really gross symptoms, so the big symptoms that they're feeling when they're extremely fatigued. That's a time to listen to yourself. There's a lot of people that love to push themselves when they're fatigued and they feel better after for it. So there's not a perfect answer to when you need that rest, especially if you're not training for something so intense like a race and you're trying to get a time that's better than the people, or you're competing in a competition. In cases like that, you don't have as much autonomy. You kind of have to follow a certain program if you want to get to where you want to go. If you're just a casual runner and you feel better and you feel more energized after you run and you start to feel that fatigue come on, that's not necessarily a sign that you need rest. So for people who really don't like to do that, if it's working for them, that's fine. But that is something it's really intricate to find out maybe if they were to get injured, what that cause was and where that would come from. So it's just explaining to them maybe the risk of that as well. If they do start to overtrain and then risk injuring themselves, they're going to have to take a step back that was farther than what they wanted to do before. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
It really is. Because one way maybe to simplify it is when people are feeling tired and sluggish, or, they're not feeling 100%, is it because your body's asking you for a break? Or is it because you're pushing yourself a little bit beyond your, I don't know how to say this. Like you need to challenge yourself. So you need to push yourself to have those physical gains, to be able to run further. So maybe that's a good question to start of, is your body telling you that it needs to slow down and rest? Or is it just tired because you're pushing yourself a little bit harder to get those athletic gains? Also easier said than done, but also that's where a really good coach comes in handy because they can help ask you questions, look at it from a third-party perspective, and also with their expertise just to give some advice of, it seems like your body's reacting really well to this. Keep pushing, you got this, keep going. Or, you know what, your body's saying, let's chill a bit. You've already gone for 3 runs this week and it's Thursday. Maybe do some yoga today or do some stretching or go for a walk.
Yeah.
So that's also where a coach, even an accountability friend, even if it's not a coach, an accountability friend can help with that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of factors to look at when you are feeling that way. Just in the last 10 years, we have learned a lot more about how sleep affects training and how important it is to be getting enough sleep to help prevent injuries. So sometimes that sluggishness, if it's coming from a place where you have a lot of sleep debt, then that's something you do want to look at and maybe take a step back, try to catch up on that. If it's coming from having too many on days during the week where you're actually getting too much running in for whatever stage of your program you're in. If you just started running 2 weeks ago and you're already running 6 days a week, could be overtraining, and you probably do need to take a step back. If it's just general sluggishness and you're not exactly sure where it's coming from, there's not really a huge cause for it. It might just be those training gains that you mentioned, and that they're pushing themselves a little harder and they're getting those gains and their body's a little tired from it, but it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
So yeah, that's a really good point, and there are a lot of causes for it and things to look at.
Yeah, and not to completely go off the rails here, but like it could be sleep. I love what you mentioned about sleep debt. I know some people who, you know, I have to wake up at 5 a.m. to get my workout in, but they went to bed at midnight, 1 a.m. It's like, it's probably more important to get that extra couple hours of sleep than it is to run.
Yeah.
Could also be, you know, are you eating enough? Like, there's so many different factors.
100%.
So again, just bottom line, trying to listen to your body as best you can, asking for help when you're not sure if you're listening to your body right or not. Probably a good way to summarize that. But what would you say is probably the best number one piece of advice you could give to a brand new runner? It's kind of where we started the conversation. We went on a little tangent, great tangent, but going back to brand new runners, what's the number one piece of advice you'd give a new runner?
Number one piece of advice, I would say to just look at their lifestyle and see if it is something that running fits into easily as it is right now. So are you going from a couch to going out and running? Maybe not the best step. Maybe we need to take that down a step. If you're already walking a lot during the day, sure, go for a jog, see how it feels. Are you strength training? Are you sleeping enough? Are you eating enough? Are you drinking water? Looking at all of those factors can give you a good idea of how prepared you are to start getting out there and running. That being said, the human body is very adaptable. So, you know, if you jump in and start doing it, and your body will tell you no, like that, if you aren't ready. So
yeah,
there's so many ways you can approach it, but I would just say take a broader look at your current lifestyle and see where running fits in, and see if there's any general changes that you need to make or want to make in order to start fitting that in.
Yeah, love that. So then also the reason that we're talking, you of course know a lot about running, as everyone is hearing already, and you have a lot of clients of your own, personal training clients, that are already runners, but then they came to you afterwards. Why did most of your clients come to you wanting a personal trainer, even though they're already established runners?
I should say a lot of the runners that I'm working with in training are actually coming off of injuries from PT, so that's why they ended up with me.
Yeah,
PT.
You're a pretty good transition from there.
Yeah, and I have a few that just want to be stronger to help with their pace, and that's probably one of the main things. Strength training can help with running faster. It can help with endurance. So if you're trying to run longer and do longer races, definitely with sprinting, as I just mentioned, faster. And it can help with injury prevention. So if you're strengthening muscles of the hip, that can actually prevent knee injuries. That's very common.
Yeah.
Strengthening the hip for the knee.
But probably something that no one else would have guessed unless you were, in the fitness world.
Yes.
Or like a professional in the fitness world, I should say.
So when individuals come to training, it's usually because something's not working that they want to be working. They're either not getting faster, they don't feel like they're strong enough, they're fatigued, and they don't know why. And they have a general sense that getting stronger is going to help them, which is very true. A lot of people are very intuitive that way, and they know that, especially with how much there is out there on Instagram about strength training right now. I only say Instagram because that's the only one I use. I know there's a ton of platforms that you can use for information these days. But with how much information there is out there on strength training, I think people are just jumping on it and saying, this is apparently good for me. Maybe I should meet with a trainer. And it's true. And then they end up learning a lot more about why they should be with a trainer as a runner than they did before they even came in. So we see that a lot. We see referrals a lot. And then we see people who kind of do know what's going on. They just don't know how to get there themselves.
So you can learn things from Instagram, is what we're learning. That the internet can be super helpful. Social media can be super helpful with learning things, especially if people follow you.
You got to take it with a grain of salt, but yeah, you definitely can.
What are some of so you mentioned like some hip stuff, maybe some knee stuff. I know before we've talked about ankle stuff. Are those kind of the main areas you see runners having the most issues? Yeah,
I'd say any of the load-bearing joints are definitely the most common, specifically knee and ankle with runners. The ankle is a lot has a lot to do with how you're landing on it. So there's a lot of technique that goes into ankle injuries, and there's usually a lot of retraining that goes into it if you are experiencing ankle in the shin, calf, or anywhere in the foot. Then again, if you sprain your ankle, that's a different thing. So there's an injury to treat there, and then go from that.
But just like general tightness, soreness.
Tightness, soreness, particularly in the calves and the front of the shin, and shin splints, of course. We would see that a lot. There's some people have shoes that play into it, so they need different support. And some people, it's just the way they're landing, and I would say that's way more common than the actual shoe that they're wearing. It's just how they're landing on their foot that might be causing some sort of muscle imbalance. So that's something, it's easy to discuss, but difficult to retrain because your body's so used to doing what it's doing. So it takes time strengthening the right muscles and retraining that technique.
Yeah.
And almost always can help with that if you are getting ankle pain. Knee is a huge one as well, but the cause of injury usually doesn't come from the knee itself unless you have a degenerative knee, meaning arthritis, and there's a wear and tear there of your cartilage. But a lot of knee injuries and knee pains that we see, especially in runners, come from the hip, sometimes from the ankle as well, but from a lot of hip weakness, which can inflame either the IT band, or just lead to more of an inward knee position, and that can put a lot of strain on the knee, and then you get knee pain in the front of the knee. So strengthening the hip actually has a lot to do with knee rehab, especially in runners, if we identify that that's kind of the cause of that. And then you'll get, back pain as well, depending on trunk lean and how someone's supporting themselves as they run, especially for distance. But yeah, I would say definitely the load-bearing joints for sure are the most common.
And that was perfect that you mentioned the landing of the foot, because my next question was going to be the most common reasons you see some of these injuries. And so it's probably, I'm going to guess, heel striking, where you land on the heel first when you run is probably the biggest thing that you see.
A lot of it, yeah.
Yeah, and then training someone to land flat-footed, and a lot of it is because of shoes. I remember I used to be more of a runner and I remember doing this whole training thing where you learn to properly run, and they took video cameras of us running, had us run with our shoes on. Pretty much all of us were heel striking. So again, like landing on your heel first, pretty much your leg looked like a check mark with that toe up. And then we took our shoes off and ran without any training, any cues, and we were all landing flat-footed, because the body knows that it's better to land fully flat on your foot to absorb that impact a little bit better. But your shoes provide so much support and comfort that it's easier to land improperly.
Yeah.
Where it's so important to learn how to run properly with good technique to avoid those injuries that probably wouldn't have thought of otherwise, or until it's too late.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned the shoes. There was actually an increase in running injuries with the development of fancier and more expensive shoes.
Oh, no way.
With the price of the shoe going up, there's actually a positive correlation in injuries, which obviously
Oh
there's
my
some causation
gosh.
there as well.
It makes sense, but I never knew that.
Yeah, and that's something really interesting to talk about, because when someone walks into a training facility and they're like, this is my favorite shoe, I love it, it's so cushy, supportive, there are ways to work around that. If someone feels the best in a shoe, that's going to probably be the right shoe for them. But we can definitely train that technique even in that shoe. But yes, the natural position that you want to land in would definitely be more of a midfoot or forefoot position, depending on whether you're going for distance or sprinting, vice versa. The heel strike will slow you down, it will fatigue your muscles. That leads to a lot of that anterior shin pain that we see. So yeah, that's a huge one, heel striking.
Yeah, wow, the way you just worded that, I never thought of it in that way of, if you're heel striking, it almost looks like those cartoons where, a little cartoon sprinting, and you hear the noise and they're trying to stop themselves, they're heel striking. So you're trying to run, but you're actively slowing yourself down by heel striking. Whereas if you land in the middle of the foot, you're being most efficient for long distance running. And then if you're sprinting, you're actively leaning forward, pushing forward.
Yes.
That is such a good way to summarize that. I never thought of that. And I used to be a runner. My goodness, mind blown. So we've talked about a lot of things, and some specific pieces of advice of landing flat-footed, and talking about, the different joints being kind of those slowing down a little bit as you're running, taking time to slow down if your body's telling you to slow down. So we've talked about a lot of things, but for now specifically active runners, people who consider themselves runners, have been running for a long time, what's your number one piece of advice for them?
Probably to incorporate some form of strength training. Strength training will definitely help them in the long run if they're not already doing it. So if people are solely running and that is their favorite thing, I see these people all the time. Like, they're great at what they do, they love their sport, that's what they enjoy, amazing. Some form of cross training is only going to benefit them in the long run by preventing injuries, the things that we talked about. And also if they're racing, helping with speed. And overall just building a little bit more muscle mass to support the structures that are commonly injured when running. So if someone doesn't have some sort of cross-training program scheduled for them, or they're not partaking in that kind of strength training, that would be my main piece of advice for those runners. Typically people that stick to one sport without providing any variability in their program are a little bit more prone to injury than others. It's not always the case, but it can be the case. So I would just say add some variability to it. That's really the main piece of advice for anyone who's just running.
Could you explain a little bit why that is when someone does the repetitive motion and how that can make you more prone to injury?
Yeah. So there's different instances where that can occur. So with younger athletes, especially teenagers, if they decide, I love running, this is the thing I want to do, sticking to a single sport when you're still developing can lead to a lot of hip impingements, just because your body doesn't have variability when you're developing then. By putting yourself in a lot of different positions, changing direction, angles, using different muscles for strength training, your body is more adaptable over time. So that one's a little bit more intuitive, right? You're developing your body for a certain motion, and it really only wants to do that. So then when you add something else, there's more risk of injury in those planes.
Yeah.
With adults, with someone who's fully developed and maybe had more variability, and they're getting into running for the first time, a huge one we see, it's called runner's knee. It's patellofemoral pain syndrome. A lot of the time it can be caused by an inflamed or tight IT band, which you can't really lengthen your IT band with stretching, but there are ways to strengthen the hip muscles so that your knee is more aligned through that IT band. That's a really common one we see in runners, just a repetitive sitting or bending of the knee motion that can kind of inflame that sheath because you're using the muscles attached to it so often that it just doesn't have time for a rest or even a change of direction. So that's kind of where overuse injuries come from, that they just don't have that periodization in there where they can actually relax those structures and allow them to recover properly. And so with someone who's only running 6-7 days a week, you might start to see those more of those overuse injuries.
Right, because you're using the same muscles over and over again. The muscles that aren't really needed for running aren't being used, and so that's just where I'm going to use the same analogy I used in another podcast, but it's almost like if you imagine those stereotypical bulky guys who only do upper body and not lower body. They have a really big, strong upper body and then itty bitty legs.
Yeah.
You can think about that for every part of the body. If you're only training one thing and not cross-training or training those other things, your individual body parts are going to kind of represent what that guy does.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we just learned so much about running, so much information. If anyone has any follow-up questions, of course, they can reach out to Omnia Fit. But where can they get a hold of you to see maybe some of your suggestions that you post on Instagram, some of your moves, or even if they just want to ask you questions about running, where can they get a hold of you at?
Absolutely. So my Instagram handle is Amanda Neri, and it's in November, ERIPT. So Amanda Neri PT, first last name PT.
You're a physical therapist.
I know. Some people see it and they say personal trainer too.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that. So however people interpret
you need to put doctor back in there.
Maybe.
Dr. Neri.
We'll
but it's
see
Amanda Neri PT.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep. And yeah, I post little goodies on there. I know people really like some of my running posts and they'll DM me and ask about them. I try to respond to anyone who has questions or suggestions for posts as well, or has inquiries about training and things like that. And I would just like to say, I know we've talked very technically about running this whole time. A big piece of advice for anyone who this may intimidate as well is that anyone who can run and does run is a runner, right?
Yeah.
Every human that can run has the ability to be a runner. You don't necessarily have to be competing at a super high level. So it is an accessible sport. It's something we're built to do. And if people love it, they love it. And it is not bad for your knees.
Yeah.
I know we talked about knee injuries a lot.
I know, you're not going to start running and get it's inevitable to get a knee injury.
You're not just going to jump into an injury. It's actually shown to be good for cartilage growth in your knees. So a lot of people think, running all the time will give me bad knees eventually. There's actually research to counter those kind of mindsets these days. So as long as you're doing it properly, getting the right periodization in there, getting some nice rest, some strength training as well, anyone can really be a runner. So
if you want to run, freaking run. Get out there, do it, crush it. Just maybe start a little slower, listen to your body. If you have questions or feel any pain, reach out to Dr. Neri.
Yeah.
And that's probably a good way to end it, right?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Feeling inspired yet? We've got you covered. At the very end of the season, we'll be launching our Omnia Fit website. You'll be able to access a platform filled with on-demand workouts like yoga, HIIT, Zumba, barre, and more from several amazing instructors. You'll also have access to meal prepping tips, personalized grocery lists, and dozens of recipes given the official okay by our incredible dietitian, Kate.
Along with everything Stephanie mentioned, you'll also have access to schedule appointments with some of the licensed professionals featured in this season. Email info@omniafit.co to stay updated on our November launch date. You'll want to stay tuned because our first season listeners get their first month free. Just use promo code POD2021, that's POD 2021 to redeem.